As a priest and a teacher, how did you recommend people read Scripture, or how would you recommend people begin reading Scripture?
Well, I would say, the beauty of the Anglican and the Roman Catholic churches is that most people don't know the Bible, so you're at an advantage. Except for the converts, the big nuisances who come from evangelical traditions, who then you have to unlearn them. You say, but you have the advantage of saying, first off, we have the church's tradition. So when we read the Bible, it's good to know the tradition, that we read the Bible as classical Christians, not as conservative Christians. If you know what if I can make that distinction. I was going to say Protestant Christians, but I thought that might be too insulting since I'm talking to a Methodist. But I don't mean that in that sense. The problem is that you have a lot of people, and this really is, I think, goes back to the Reformation, who maybe not the reformers themselves, but I think certainly in subsequent generations who increasingly are reading the Bible. It's like G.K. Chesterton said that, when you take one piece of church furniture and smash up all the rest, then you're pretty much committed to that remaining piece of furniture, and that's what's happened here with the Bible, is that you have this thing now which becomes as and you've heard all of this, it's nothing new, but the paper pope and et cetera, et cetera. If you don't have an infallible pope, then you have to have something that's infallible. And so that becomes the Bible. And the problem with that, of course, is that as the spiritual understanding, the early church, you have a very definite, you read the Bible understanding that there is the literal meaning. Literal meaning doesn't mean that it literally happened this way. Say, if you're reading history, it means, what does the text just say? So if you're reading, say, the book of Jonah, which is a wonderful parable and is written like fiction, if you say, did this literally happen? Well, obviously, you're going to get really stuck in defending crazy things after a while. Can humans be swallowed by whales, and this kind of thing. But if you're going to read Jonah literally, then all you're interested in is what is the story actually saying here as a narrative. And then the church, of course, said, but even more importantly, what is the spiritual reading? And there you have three kinds of. We get this right from the very earliest centuries. You have the moral reading, the allegorical reading, and the anagogical reading. And I won't try to unpack all that here. But those are very important to realize, that when you're reading any text of the Old Testament or the New, you have to be aware that you're also meant to read the spiritual reading as well as the literal. And so, in order to get people to understand what it is that they have before them in this library, the Bible, with its many genres, which are arranged in a way that, by the early church, to be understood almost like a diptych that you open up and you look at it. In order to get people to understand that, they really need to be educated in that. And that's so you have to start. So how do you get people to read the Bible? Well, the best way to get them to read the Bible is by first knowing how to read it as a classical Christian first, and then imparting that knowledge to disciples. I mean, one of the things that you do with discipleship should be, okay, you've heard everything, you know that this kind of Christian reads the Bible this way, and that kind of Christian reads the Bible a different way. Here is the classical Christian model. Here is how the earliest generations of the church read it. This is how the fathers read it. This is become knowledgeable not only in that, but also in critical studies. Know the difference in literature between genres, between There's a whole education there, and I would say before you give anybody a Bible just to go and get with God, also give them the tools that they need, and I think that's an important work that pastors and priests are supposed to do. I did that at Northern Illinois University for the 12 years I was there, and I started out doing a Bible study that was like 3 or 4 people. After about 5 or so years, there were so many there. Literally, it was in excess of 100, and it was climbing, and there were people coming from other churches. So I had to ask myself, what am I doing differently than anybody else? Because it wasn't my incredible charisma or anything that was drawing people in. It was the fact that I was treating them like adults who could understand literary theory, could understand, let's look at things like why Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, and why they're saying things differently than each other. Let's not pretend that there aren't any textual contradictions. Let's not play with the book or first create a doctrine of what it is that the Bible is, and then you fit what you're reading into this doctrine of the Bible that I'm giving you. Rather, let's look at the texts. Let's look at how it would have been understood in its own time. Let's look at how that interacts with us today in our time. And I think that was there was a lot of work that went into that, and people started coming just simply because it was different than the kind of Bible studies they were getting elsewhere. So I throw that out as a. Were we talking about the Bible? Was that the?
We were, and that makes me want to.
I start rambling here.
Oh, this is great. This is great, actually. So, what was your preparation for teaching that kind of Bible study?
Lots of reading and study. I mean, I started teaching Scripture in Bible studies all the way back in 1973, 74. And so I've just spent years and years and years poring over the texts, reading the pertinent scholarship. One of the biggest things that actually helped me was back in the 1970s. I took courses at the University of Maryland in prose analysis and poetic analysis. And this was back on the postmodernism hadn't reached us yet, So this was the old-fashioned, very strict, what makes this a good poem? What makes this a crummy poem? And it wasn't, if I had ever written an essay for Dr. Shedd, in which I put in, my feelings about a poem, I would have gotten an F. You just didn't do that. So there was a really. So I'd say if there was any class or course I took in college that prepared me for serious biblical study, it would actually be that. Learning how to understand prose and poetry and what makes this different than that and better than that and things like that. And then when you take that and you approach the Scriptures first as a collection of literary units with that kind of background, and then you see, well, good heavens, the fathers read it that way. Origen, one of my favorite. He's not everybody's favorite, but Origen is my favorite ancient biblical commentator. Here's somebody who all the way back in the 180s was saying, when you read the Gospels, remember, it's like a tapestry. He actually uses that terminology. He says it's like a tapestry. It's the interweaving of historical fact and those things that the evangelists make up, in order to interpret those facts so that we have a message, about Jesus. Well, gosh, you say that to people in some context today, you're a terrible liberal. But this is how the fathers are reading it. This is how Origen was reading it. Gregory of Nyssa was reading it this way. Augustine, for heaven's sakes, was reading it that way. So not only is that not liberal, it happens to be the oldest and most classical way to approach Scripture. that the church has. So to deal with that seriously, to take that and to unpack that for students, well, that was exciting. It made the scriptures suddenly exciting again.
Yeah.